Radiance is not born from perfection, from the unbroken woman who never flinched or faltered, but from the one who stood knee-deep in the wreckage of her own heart and chose not to harden. Before we dive into 4 habits that make a heartbroken woman radiant, make sure to subscribe for more videos like this. The heartbroken woman who becomes radiant does so not because she avoided devastation, but because she met it with reverence. She does not emerge untouched, she emerges transformed. Her glow is not the shine of untouched porcelain, but the shimmer of gold running through cracks she no longer hides. Society often teaches women to hide their grief behind curated smiles and rebound relationships, to rush through the ache and chase validation as if healing were a race. But the woman who glows after ruin refuses that script. She slows down, she listens to the silence between sobs. She honors the love that once filled her, not by chasing a replacement, but by choosing herself as the sacred ground where love will rise again. Her radiance is not performative. It does not demand attention. It hums quietly from the way she tends to her wounds with honesty, from the way she no longer shames her sadness. There is something unforgettable about a woman who doesn't pretend she wasn't shattered, who doesn't minimize the ache to make others comfortable. Her strength is not in the denial of heartbreak, but in her refusal to be defined by it. People feel her presence differently because it is grounded in truth. She walks with a slowness that says, I am not rushing to fill the space someone else left. Her gaze softens toward others, not because she is naive, but because she now knows what it costs to close off. She wears her new boundaries not like armor, but like sunlight filtered through a window, warm, clear, and firm, and those who try to enter her life now meet that light first. She becomes the woman who no longer apologizes for feeling too much, loving too deeply, or expecting reciprocity. Her grief didn't shrink her, it expanded her capacity for discernment. She sees now who simply wants access to her glow and who is willing to honor its source. And the truth is, people are drawn to her not because she is trying to be magnetic, but because she has stopped trying altogether. There is a quiet rebellion in a heartbroken woman who refuses to dim her truth just to stay desirable. She knows now that her worth is not up for negotiation. And in a world that rewards performance, her authenticity is radical. She does not chase healing like a finish line. She lets it unfold like a season. And when she laughs again, when her shoulders shake not from grief but from joy, it is not because she forgot the pain. It is because she made room for joy alongside it. That is the real radiance. Not the absence of sorrow, but the presence of something larger. She no longer begs for closure. She no longer looks for signs in silence. She writes her own ending. And that ending is not revenge, not rebound, not rescue. It is her. A woman who walked through fire and didn't come back scorched, but sculpted. A woman who now knows that the glow people see in her eyes is not a product of luck or charm. It is the light of someone who met her ruin, looked it in the face, and decided to rise anyway, and rise differently. And rise without asking permission. Grief, when met with presence instead of panic, does not destroy a woman, it distills her. It burns away illusion, false attachment, borrowed beliefs, and all the scaffolding she once built to feel needed, chosen, or safe. And in the raw space left behind, something rare begins to take shape. A heartbroken woman who does not numb or rush or rewrite her pain becomes a vessel for something deeper than recovery. She becomes a container for alchemy. Carl Jung once said that the gold is in the shadow, and nowhere is that more true than in the aftermath of heartbreak. Because when the softest part of a woman is pierced, and she chooses not to close it with bitterness, but to keep it open with truth, what rises from her sorrow is not weakness, but radiance. She stops outsourcing her peace. She no longer chases comfort in places that only mirrored her wounds. She does not deny that it hurt, she holds that hurt in her hands like sacred soil. And something happens in that holding. Her heartbreak becomes a forge. The tears she cried in silence become the salt that purifies her boundaries. The silence she sat in alone becomes the womb of her new wisdom. Her ache is not wasted. It becomes instruction. And unlike those who rush to distraction, who bury grief beneath false positivity or performative resilience, she takes her time. She walks through every room of her sorrow, naming what lived there and what must now be released. She learns to live without answers. She begins to trust her own pulse again. And in doing so, she glows not because she is untouched, but because she is unafraid to be touched by life. That glow is not visible to everyone. Some will misread her stillness as sadness, her solitude as emptiness, her softness as fragility, but those who have done their own grief work will recognize it immediately. They will see the light in her eyes as the flame that only flickers after surviving a storm. She doesn't tell the world she has changed. She doesn't make her healing a headline. But the way she carries herself tells the truth. She is no longer the woman who needs to be chosen to feel valuable. She has chosen herself, again and again, in the dark. She is no longer afraid of endings because she now understands they are doorways. The heartbreak that once made her feel abandoned has now made her anchored. She has become deeply intimate with herself. She has stopped begging others to witness her worth. She has remembered who she was before the world told her she needed to be softer, quieter, easier to love. And she does not return to her old life like a survivor. She returns like an artist with a new brush. Everything she touches now bears the fingerprint of truth. Her friendships, her routines, her voice. They all emerge from a place of rooted clarity. Because she didn't just survive heartbreak, she let it burn away everything that wasn't real. And what remains now is a woman whose radiance can't be replicated. A woman who understands that grief is not an enemy to defeat, but a teacher to welcome. A woman who will never again fear the fire, because she has become the gold it leaves behind. Carl Jung taught that the path to wholeness is not paved with perfection, but with wounds that have been made conscious. The broken self, as he saw it, is not something to be fixed or hidden, but something to be integrated. And heartbreak is perhaps one of the most brutal invitations to this integration, because it splits a woman open in places she thought were sealed. It dismantles illusions she mistook for foundations. It introduces her to the parts of herself she abandoned to be loved. And in that reckoning she finds the raw material for her rebirth. The woman who is heartbroken but aware begins to understand that her pain is not just personal, it is archetypal. She is not the first to feel discarded, to ache in the middle of the night, to question her worth in the absence of affection, but she may be the first in her lineage to sit with that pain without rushing to erase it. She may be the first to look at the shattered mirror and see, not shame, but revelation. The broken self, through Jung's lens, is the part of us that contains both the shadow and the gold. And when a woman walks through heartbreak with her eyes wide open, she stops projecting her wounds onto others and begins to reclaim them as her own. She stops blaming the one who left and starts asking why she stayed so long in places that asked her to shrink. She does not bypass the pain with spiritual slogans or empty mantras. She lets the pain speak. She lets it name the needs she silenced, the standards she lowered, the betrayal she justified in the name of love, and that honesty begins the alchemy. The more she brings the hidden parts of herself into the light, the less power they have over her. The more she embraces the complexity of her grief, the rage, the longing, the tenderness, the numbness, the more whole she becomes. Jung believed that individuation was the process of becoming the self, capital S, the fullest expression of our true nature. Not the mask we wear to be loved, but the soul that exists beneath the mask. And the woman who embraces her heartbreak as a threshold, not a failure, is walking that path. She is no longer interested in being the version of herself that pleases others at the cost of her peace. She is no longer seduced by fantasies of rescue. She understands that the only one who can save her is the self she once buried to survive. That self is rising now. It is not polished or perfect, but it is real. And in its realness, it is radiant. She does not seek wholeness in the arms of another. She finds it in the way she breathes through grief without needing to numb it. She finds it in the way she learns to trust her own instincts again after years of outsourcing her truth. She finds it in the stillness that follows sorrow, where she meets herself not as a victim but as a witness. She is not broken beyond repair. She is breaking open toward herself. And in that unfolding, she becomes more powerful than she ever was before, not because the heartbreak didn't hurt, but because she allowed it to strip her down to her essence, and she chose to rebuild from the truth rather than the illusion. She feels it all and does not apologize. The tremble in her voice, the salt in her tears, the quiet ache in her chest that no one else can see, she lets it exist without numbing, performing, or masking it behind polite strength. This is not a woman who pretends to be okay so others won't feel uncomfortable. This is not a woman who edits her grief to fit someone else's timeline or tone. She sits with her sorrow and lets it speak, not because she is fragile, but because she is brave enough to feel what others run from. The first habit of a radiant, heartbroken woman is emotional honesty, and it is the most misunderstood form of power. In a world that tells women to smile through suffering, to be agreeable even when abandoned, to shrink their truth into something more palatable, she does the opposite. She lets the pain rise and move through her like a tide that will not be stopped. She lets it break, wash, and hollow her, not out of masochism, but because she knows that only through the full arc of feeling can she ever be free. Her magnetism comes not from perfection or poise, but from the raw humanity she refuses to hide. When she cries, it is not performative, it is not a plea for sympathy, it is a sacred release. And when she stops crying, she does not pretend the storm never happened. She carries the softness with her, the tenderness, the fierce understanding of what it means to be cracked open and still rise. This kind of emotional honesty scares people. It disarms them, it forces them to confront their own buried pain, but it also draws in the ones who are ready to meet her there. The ones who have bled too and survived, the ones who are no longer interested in shallow smiles and surface-level comfort. Emotional honesty is not chaos, it is not indulgence, it is clarity. And the woman who practices it does not collapse under the weight of her feelings. She expands. She learns that feeling everything does not make her weak, it makes her wise. Because buried pain becomes armor, and armor becomes distance, and distance becomes disconnection from self and others. But she refuses that path. She stays close to the truth, even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts. She does not rush to forgive. She does not fake closure. She feels it all, the anger, the confusion, the longing, the disappointment, and she gives each emotion the dignity of being known. This presence with herself makes her radiant. She becomes a lighthouse, not because she has it all together, but because she is lit from within by her willingness to stay present through the darkness. Carl Jung said that what we do not make conscious will appear as fate. This woman refuses to let unconscious pain shape her future. She makes it conscious by naming it, holding it, honoring it. And that is the beginning of transformation. She does not apologize for being too much. She no longer censors her tears or explains her silence. She knows her truth is not a burden, it is a compass. And the more she trusts it, the more others are drawn to her, not because she asks to be seen, but because she radiates the kind of realness that cannot be faked. Her emotional honesty becomes her power, and in a world that rewards numbness, her ability to feel becomes nothing short of revolutionary. There comes a moment in a heartbroken woman's life when the performance ends, not out of defiance or exhaustion, but because she simply no longer has the appetite for pretending. She no longer smiles out of obligation, no longer laughs to put others at ease when her world has shattered quietly inside. She lets her face show the ache. She lets her body move slowly if it must. She stops giving explanations for her silence, stops dressing her wounds in borrowed optimism. She has realized something sacred in the stillness of grief, that pretending is its own kind of abandonment, and she refuses to abandon herself ever again. This woman, radiant in her rawness, walks through rooms now without armor, without small talk that betrays her truth. Her "I'm fine" has been replaced with real words, or sometimes no words at all. Because silence too, when honest, is a form of power. She has stepped out of the prison of being the strong one, the agreeable one, the one who carries everyone else's comfort at the expense of her own. And in doing so, she has discovered a different kind of strength that does not require applause, only integrity. Carl Jung spoke of the tension between persona and shadow, of how the masks we wear become cages when they are used to avoid pain. This woman no longer chooses the mask. She lets the shadow rise. She befriends it. She names her anger, her sorrow, her longing, her shame. She no longer sugarcoats her past or edits her story to make it more palatable to those who fear their own reflection in her truth. And this refusal to perform makes her luminous, not in a glittering, showy way, but like a candle that refuses to go out. There is a steadiness in her now, a gravity. a dignity that cannot be manufactured. Others feel it when they are near her, that subtle pull to be more honest themselves. Her presence does not demand, it invites. Her eyes do not plead to be understood, they simply see. And the more she shows up without pretense, the more magnetic she becomes. Not because she is trying to be seen, but because authenticity always leaves a mark. She is no longer afraid of being too much or too messy. She has stopped translating her feelings into digestible pieces. She has stopped apologizing for the way her voice trembles when she speaks her truth. In the wake of heartbreak, she has learned that pretending to be okay only prolongs the pain. It buries it in layers of false smiles and hollow affirmations. But when she stands in her truth, naked and trembling and unedited, she becomes more than a woman in pain, she becomes a woman reborn. Those who once expected her to keep playing the role will not know what to do with this version of her. They will fumble in her presence, searching for the mask that is no longer there. But she does not owe them comfort. She owes herself truth. And that truth is radiant. It shines through her posture, her breath, her tone. It shapes the way she moves through the world with clarity, with intention, with a softness that is not weakness, but the result of surviving without hardening. She is no longer interested in being palatable. She is interested in being real. And that realness is the most beautiful thing about her. It is not loud, it is not performative. It is the quiet, steady glow of a woman who has stopped pretending and in doing so, has finally come home to herself. There is a peculiar discomfort people feel in the presence of a woman who no longer needs to be understood to feel at peace. Her energy, once tangled up in explaining herself, has been reclaimed and redirected inward. She doesn't reach out to reassure others of her okayness. She doesn't rush to clarify her silence, and because of that, some mistake her glow for coldness. They look at her stillness and assume sadness, misreading the quiet dignity of her healing as emotional vacancy. But what they're witnessing isn't a woman shut down. It's a woman who has stepped into the sacred interior of her own life. A woman who no longer performs grief to be palatable. A woman who doesn't translate her transformation into small, digestible doses for those who can't handle her full becoming. What they see, and can't name, is the presence of someone who has chosen depth over drama. She is not cold, she is clear. She is not empty, she is evolving. There is a calm in her now that does not beg to be invited in, and that unnerves people who are used to proximity being earned through over-explaining or people-pleasing. But she no longer plays those games. She no longer lets her glow be dimmed by the discomfort of others. In fact, she has stopped negotiating her truth altogether. And this unbothered rootedness can look like distance to those who have never seen a woman centered in herself. It's not that she's dismissive, it's that she's discerning. She knows where her energy goes, and she guards it like a flame in the wind. She no longer floods a room with emotional caretaking. She no longer tries to fix what was never hers to hold. Her boundaries are not loud, but they are unshakable, and the ones who misread them as cruelty are often the same ones who once benefited from her lack of them. There is an elegance in how she carries her grief now. It no longer spills or apologizes. It simply exists as part of her alchemy. And that poise, that restraint is so unfamiliar to a world that confuses performative vulnerability with authenticity. People expect her to fall apart in a way that's loud, chaotic, easy to pity, but she doesn't perform her pain anymore. She transforms it, and the glow they see is the residue of that transformation. It is not flashy, it is not seeking validation, it is the quiet, enduring light of someone who has grieved consciously and come through the other side with softer eyes and a stronger spine. They don't understand that her glow is a boundary in motion. It is her way of saying, without words, that she will not abandon herself to soothe another's projections. Carl Jung wrote of the necessity to integrate the shadow, to bring the unconscious into consciousness so it no longer controls us. That's what she's done. She has met the parts of herself that once clung, once begged, once dimmed, and she has brought them home. That kind of wholeness radiates, and not everyone knows how to receive it. Some will shrink in its presence. Some will criticize what they cannot comprehend, but she does not explain, she does not convince. Her glow is not for decoration, it is a signal to those who are ready for truth, for depth, for presence. and to those who are not, it simply remains misunderstood. But she has made peace with that. Her glow was never meant to be explained. It was meant to be felt. And only those who have walked their own healing will know exactly what it means. There is something breathtaking about a woman who no longer rushes to be chosen, who no longer rebuilds her life just to prove to others she has moved on. Her second habit is not visible from the outside, not easily applauded or validated. It happens in the quiet moments, in the soft reshaping of her mornings, in the way she reclaims her own body, her own breath, her own belonging. She does not need an audience for her healing. She does not post declarations or seek revenge through achievement. Instead, she turns inward. She tends to the invisible architecture of her soul. She notices where her rhythm was disrupted by love that demanded her to contort, by a life that asked her to self-abandon just to feel secure. She no longer participates in that dance. She no longer sacrifices her center to orbit someone else's gravity. She builds from the inside out. She starts with the basics, the sacred ordinary. She returns to sleep that feels like sanctuary. She eats not for control but for nourishment. She moves not for punishment but for presence. She speaks to herself in the language of softness, even when the world is sharp. She wakes not to impress but to remember. Every day becomes a quiet vow to herself, every step a recalibration of her rhythm. She doesn't leap into new love because she understands that rushing into someone else's arms too quickly is sometimes just another form of avoidance. She doesn't need to be saved anymore. She becomes her own safe place. And in doing so, she becomes magnetic in a way that has nothing to do with surface beauty or performance. People feel her peace when she walks into a room. They feel the steadiness in her presence. They may not know what changed, but they can sense that she is no longer outsourcing her value, that her center cannot be moved by approval or rejection. Carl Jung spoke of individuation, of the self becoming whole through integration. That is what she is doing now. She is integrating the parts of herself she once gave away. She is no longer fragmenting her truth to be digestible. She is no longer decorating her pain with distractions. She sits with it. She listens to it. She lets it teach her without rushing the lesson. She reclaims joy not as a performance, but as a birthright. She dances without being watched. She writes without an audience. She cultivates stillness not because it is trendy, but because it allows her to hear her own wisdom again. And the more she honors that internal voice, the less she chases external noise. She realizes that what she was looking for in someone else was never about them. It was the reflection of herself she hoped they could show her. But now she has found it without them, and that changes everything. She does not reject love. She simply no longer seeks it from a place of deficit. Her love, when it comes again, will be an offering, not a lifeline. Her wholeness is not fragile. It is forged. It is held together by every choice she made to come home to herself. She no longer builds for appearance. She builds for alignment, and that internal sanctuary becomes the most beautiful part of her. It glows quietly. It anchors her deeply. It makes her radiant, not because she has been restored by someone else, but because she has remembered how to restore herself. Carl Jung believed that every person holds within them both masculine and feminine energies, the anima and the animus, and that true psychological wholeness comes from the union of these opposites, not from finding another person to complete what we think we lack. For the radiant woman, especially one who has been broken open by heartbreak, this becomes not just theory but lived truth. She no longer seeks someone to rescue her or to prove her worth. She doesn't chase safety through relationships or validation through romantic attention. Instead, she turns inward and begins the sacred work of what Jung called the inner marriage, where the nurturing and intuitive parts of her psyche begin to dance in harmony with her decisiveness, her clarity, her structure. She becomes both soft and sovereign, receptive and resolute. She learns how to hold herself when the nights are long and lonely. She learns how to protect her peace without becoming guarded. She doesn't collapse into her emotions, but she also doesn't bury them beneath forced logic or control. There is a balance now, a partnership within her own soul, and from that inner union arises a woman who no longer feels split or searching. The wounded girl who once looked for someone else to mirror her value has now become the mirror. And because she has cultivated both the inner masculine that provides direction and discipline, and the inner feminine that nurtures and feels. She is no longer at war with herself. She is no longer caught in the push and pull of extremes. She is no longer waiting for a man to offer her strength or a relationship to give her softness. She holds both. She embodies both. And in doing so, she becomes a paradox that is magnetic without effort. She can lead without dominating. She can surrender without disappearing. She can cry without falling apart. She can take up space without apology. People often mistake her radiance for something mysterious or unattainable, but the truth is it comes from integration, not performance. She is not pretending to be whole. She has become whole through years of breaking and choosing to rebuild truthfully. Through solitude, she discovered her own rhythm. Through grief, she discovered her own wisdom. Through silence, she heard her own voice rise. And that voice does not beg, it does not tremble. It speaks from the center of a woman who has stopped outsourcing her completion. She may welcome love, but she will never need it to feel full. That distinction alone changes everything. Jung's inner marriage is not about perfection, but about partnership within the self. And when that happens, when a woman becomes the safe place she once sought in others, she glows differently. She is not desperate to be seen, but she is impossible to ignore. She moves through the world as someone who has remembered she was never half of anything. She is not looking to be chosen. She has chosen herself. She has chosen to do the work, to stay when it was easier to leave when it was easier to stay, and to return to herself every time someone else walked away. The radiant woman is not radiant because life has been kind. She is radiant because she has become kind to herself, because she has made peace between the parts of her that once felt too much and not enough. She is radiant because she has learned how to love from overflow, not from emptiness, and that love, when it is finally given, becomes a gift rather than a gap to be filled. There comes a moment in a heartbroken woman's journey where she no longer feels the urge to announce her healing or prove her worth, where she steps out of the performance and into the quiet knowing of who she has become. She stops trying to convince people she is lovable. She stops oversharing to feel understood, stops overgiving to feel needed, stops over-explaining herself in rooms that never tried to understand her in the first place. Her glow becomes quieter now, not because it is dimmed, but because it no longer depends on external reflection to shine. It is the kind of radiance that lives in the bones, in the breath, in the pauses between what she says and what she holds back. It is not a glow that begs to be seen, it is a glow that exists because she has finally made peace with her own presence. She no longer tries to win over people who never valued her, no longer tolerates environments that mistake her softness for a lack of boundaries. Her silence is no longer heavy with suppression, it is anchored in discernment. She doesn't correct every misunderstanding, doesn't chase every missed opportunity, doesn't force her way into spaces not built to hold her. There is an elegance in her detachment, not from life, but from the need to be palatable. She understands now that true radiance doesn't come from being constantly visible, it comes from being rooted. Rooted in truth, in self-trust, in the sacred decision to take up space without seeking permission. Her walk is slower, not from hesitation but from depth. Her speech is softer, not from fear but from reverence. Her presence is undeniable not because she demands attention but because she has stopped diluting who she is to earn belonging. The glow of this woman is not the bright flash of someone trying to be seen, it is the steady flame of someone who sees herself, who has learned to sit in a room and not shrink, who has learned to love without abandoning herself in the process, who no longer treats attention as currency. Her beauty is no longer something she wears, it is something she exudes. It is not performative. It is not calculated. It does not shift depending on who is watching. She has stopped shape-shifting. She has stopped editing herself for acceptance. She has stopped waiting for applause to validate her direction. She glows now because she has finally come home to herself, and that kind of light cannot be replicated. People may not always understand it. Some may try to minimize it, others may be drawn to it without knowing why, but the ones who have done their own inner work will recognize it instantly. They will see the way she does not reach, does not plead, does not entertain to be loved. They will feel the peace that follows her into a room, the unshakable sense that she is not trying to be anything other than exactly who she is. That is the glow of a woman who no longer performs her power. She simply lives it. She no longer puts her light up for auction. She is not trying to be seen, she is trying to be true. And in a world that constantly demands women to shine louder, smile bigger, explain more, her refusal to do so is not arrogance, it is clarity. It is the quiet revolution of someone who has nothing left to prove and everything left to be. There is a shift that happens in a heartbroken woman who has done her grief work, the kind of shift that doesn't make headlines but reshapes her entire life from the inside out. And it begins with how fiercely she starts to protect her peace. She no longer allows her energy to be siphoned by people who only show up to take. She no longer makes herself available to those who come with chaos in their mouths and entitlement in their footsteps. Her time, her silence, her presence, her softness, they all become sacred territory. Not because she is hard or jaded, but because she has learned through pain what it costs to keep giving to what does not give back. She has cried enough tears over people who saw her gentleness as an invitation to exploit. She has offered too many explanations to those who never intended to understand. So now, her peace is not just a luxury, it is a vow. It is the altar she returns to. It is the sanctuary she defends with quiet authority. Her no is not aggressive. It is not loud. It is not bitter. It is clean, unwavering, and non-negotiable. And behind that no lives every lesson she learned the hard way, every late-night spiral she endured alone, every moment she bit her tongue to keep the peace and suffered the internal war that followed. She no longer confuses empathy with self-abandonment. She no longer says yes when her body says no just to be polite. She has come to understand that protecting her peace is not an act of selfishness but of reverence. And so, she creates space between herself and anything that threatens her balance. She does not stay in conversations that turn sharp. She does not justify her needs to people who mock them. She does not reopen the door for those who only came to drain her. She does not explain her distance to those who disrespected her closeness. Her boundaries are not punishments. They are sacred markers of where she ends and another begins. They are a love letter to her nervous system. They are the evidence of her healing, and those boundaries do not make her less loving. They make her love more wisely. She still gives, but from a place of overflow, not depletion. She still listens, but not at the expense of her own voice. She still shows up, but not for those who weaponize her presence. She has stopped being the emotional landfill for people who refuse to deal with their own mess. She has stopped keeping the peace when it means losing herself, and in doing so, she has found a power that is not loud or theatrical but unshakable. A power that says, I do not owe my light to those who try to dim it. A power that says I am allowed to walk away from what does not honor me. A power that says my peace is not up for negotiation. There will be people who call her difficult, people who call her selfish, people who will try to shame her for the audacity of protecting her own well-being. But those words do not land anymore. Because she knows that her peace is not a privilege, it is her lifeline, it is her compass, it is the soil where her radiance grows, and she will not let anyone trample that garden again. Not out of anger, but out of devotion to the woman she has become. There is a moment in every heartbroken woman's healing when the silence stops sounding like absence and starts sounding like a hymn. When the rooms she used to fill with anxious conversation or loud distractions become sanctuaries instead of voids, it happens slowly, like dawn slipping through the curtains. At first, solitude feels like punishment, like the echo of someone missing, but then something shifts. She stops pacing, she stops checking her phone, she stops interpreting her alone time as failure. She begins to listen, not for someone else's footsteps, but for her own heartbeat. She lights candles not for ambience, but as ritual. She sets the table for one, and does not feel pitied. She walks without destination, and still arrives somewhere sacred, because the more she is alone, the more she begins to remember herself. Not the self she showed to be liked, not the self she contorted to be kept, but the self who existed before the noise. She starts to find pleasure in her own rhythms, the way she makes her tea, the way she stretches in the morning, the way she cries without explanation and laughs without an audience. Her solitude becomes a conversation between her and her soul, a place where no one interrupts, edits, or misunderstands her. It is in that stillness that she meets her own depth, her own intelligence, her own knowing. And for the first time, she does not flee. She stays. She stays through the ache, through the memories, through the emptiness that turns into fullness. She no longer sees solitude as something to be cured. She sees it as sacred. It becomes her classroom, her chapel, her cocoon. In solitude, she confronts every part of herself she once tried to outsource to love, her fear of abandonment, her hunger for validation, her longing to be saved, and she does not banish those parts. She holds them. She mothers them. She becomes the safe place they always needed, and as she does, her loneliness transforms into liberation. She stops needing others to mirror her worth. She stops contorting to be palatable. She stops clinging to what feels familiar just to escape the discomfort of being alone. She starts to notice how she fills a room all by herself, how her presence is enough, how her energy sets the tone. She moves through her day without waiting for a message, an invite, a witness. Her life becomes her own again. Her solitude stops being quieted, starts speaking. It tells her which relationships were built on her silence. It tells her which patterns were never hers to carry. It tells her that she does not have to be surrounded to be whole. And that revelation is not loud. It is not celebrated, but it is everything. It is the turning point. The moment she realizes that a woman who can sit with herself without running is a woman who cannot be manipulated, who cannot be bribed with attention, who cannot be seduced by chaos, who cannot be destroyed by loss, because she knows where her peace lives now, and no one can take it from her. She does not fear solitude anymore. She protects it. She returns to it. She trusts it, not because it's easy, but because it's real. Because in a world that tells her she must be chosen to matter, she has chosen herself in the quiet, and from that quiet, a glow rises. Not because she is untouched by sorrow, but because she is unafraid of her own soul. There is a moment, subtle and sacred, when a heartbroken woman stops merely surviving and begins returning to herself, not to the version that loved blindly, not to the one who endured too much in silence, but to the original self that existed before she ever handed her joy over for safekeeping. At first, the return is fragile. It's a half smile while dancing alone in the kitchen. It's a laugh that catches her off guard because it has been so long. It's the sudden urge to paint or sing or wear red lipstick for no reason at all. These are not performances. These are not bait for validation. These are breadcrumbs that lead her back to the woman she buried beneath compromise and contortion. She begins to remember what she loved before she was asked to shrink. She starts doing things that don't make sense to anyone else but feel like oxygen to her. She buys herself flowers and doesn't wait for an occasion. She bakes a cake and eats it with her fingers. She writes poetry that never rhymes and never apologizes for its chaos. She plays old songs and doesn't flinch when they remind her of him, because now the music belongs to her again. Her body, once numb from tension and guarded touch, starts to soften, not for someone else's hands, but for her own reclamation. She learns the shape of her own breath again. She lets herself want without shame, want beauty, want stillness, want fire, want solitude, want company that doesn't dilute her. And this desire isn't about replacing what she lost. It's about unearthing what she forgot. She starts talking to herself in a tone she once reserved for others. She becomes tender with her own fear, patient with her own grief, generous with her own joy. And it shows, in the way her eyes crinkle when she laughs, in the way she doesn't look around the room before smiling, in the way her energy speaks before she does. People begin to notice, but not in the way they used to. They don't just see her beauty, they feel her presence. They feel the boundary between admiration and access. They realize she is not seeking to be seen, she is simply being, and that is more powerful than performance. She doesn't have to prove that she is healed. The way she hums while watering her plants says it all. The way she sets her phone down at dinner and looks out the window like she's never seen the sky before. The way she no longer carries urgency in her limbs or apology in her voice. This is what it looks like when a woman reclaims herself. This is what it sounds like when she stops echoing someone else's needs and begins to listen to her own rhythm. Her creativity returns not in torrents, but in steady waves. She starts new projects not to distract herself, but to express herself. Her laughter isn't loud, it's layered. It's the kind that comes from deep in the belly, where freedom lives. She doesn't wait for permission to feel good. She becomes the source of her own pleasure. And this doesn't mean she forgets the heartbreak. It means she uses it as a mirror, a teacher, a sacred threshold she crossed to come back home. And now that she's home, she decorates the walls with color again. She throws open the windows. She breathes in her own life and smiles, not because it's perfect, but because it's hers, fully, finally, fiercely. There is a rare and radiant kind of love that emerges from a heart that has been broken and rebuilt with intentional love that no longer demands sacrifice of the self as proof of devotion. This is the love a woman learns to give after heartbreak, has taught her the cost of self-abandonment. It is not colder, it is not guarded, it is sovereign. She still loves deeply, wildly even, but now her love has shape, rhythm, breath. It is not poured out in desperation, it is offered from fullness. Before, she gave too much and called it loyalty. She shrank and called it compromise. She tolerated and called it grace. But now, she no longer confuses love with endurance. She knows that love is not real if it requires her to go missing in the process. Her love does not come with apologies for being too much or not enough. It does not shapeshift to keep others comfortable. It does not seek to be rescued or to rescue. It stands upright, it walks beside, and when it leans in, it does so from choice, not survival. She does not let someone else's silence mute her voice. She does not let someone else's needs cancel out her own. She does not dim her joy to protect fragile egos. She gives her love like a garden, gives its fruit not all at once, not without boundaries, but in season, in truth, in balance with the sun and the rain. The woman who gives love without losing herself understands the difference between holding someone and carrying their chaos. She listens with presence but no longer tries to heal what refuses to grow. She supports without enabling. She forgives without forgetting who she is. Her heart is still open, but her spine has learned how to stand, and that posture changes everything. She no longer offers herself as a canvas for others to paint their needs onto. She is already a masterpiece in motion. And when she loves now, it feels different, not performative, not needy. Not proving, it is quiet, certain, embodied. Her love doesn't rush to fill silences or anxieties. It sits, it breathes, it trusts, and it does not ask for less of her in order to stay. She gives without depletion, she receives without guilt. She leaves when her soul says go, not when someone else gives permission. That doesn't make her hard, it makes her honest. It makes her whole. People who are used to consuming love like oxygen may find her confusing. She will not beg, she will not break, she will not barter with her worth. She will meet them eye to eye and say yes when it feels right and no when it doesn't. And the ones who understand will stay. They will not just take from her, they will bring their own fullness, their own rootedness, their own love that does not cling but connects. Because sovereign love is magnetic to those who have also done the work. It's not the kind of love that burns out quickly or burns through you. It's the kind that glows, that sustains, that deepens, and even if it ends, she will not unravel, because she does not give herself away anymore. She shares herself. And that difference is everything. That difference is her freedom. That difference is her radiance. That difference is the heartbeat of a woman who has learned that the most sacred kind of love is the kind that never asks her to disappear. There comes a moment in every heartbroken woman's journey where the flicker of light that once seemed so tentative, so dependent on outside warmth, transforms into a steady flame that needs no witness to burn. She no longer waits for someone to call her beautiful, to feel radiant. She no longer seeks closure to feel complete. Her light is no longer fragile because it was forged, not found. It did not come from praise or attention. It came from standing still in her own sorrow and choosing to stay with herself when no one else did. It came from learning how to hold grief in one hand and grace in the other. It came from refusing to betray herself, even when the world told her it would be easier to just move on. The woman she is now does not resemble the woman she was before the heartbreak, and that is not a tragedy. That is the point. She has not gone back to her old self. She has become someone more whole, someone who carries both softness and steel in her voice, someone whose kindness is no longer confused with naivety. Someone whose peace is not passive, but a deliberate act of rebellion against every force that once tried to shatter her. The glow she carries now is quiet. It does not clamor for recognition. It is not performative. It is the glow of someone who survived her own undoing and emerged with a deeper kind of beauty, the kind that is not filtered or fragile, but rooted in truth. She does not explain her light. She does not defend it. She does not chase those who once dimmed it. Her presence alone reveals who deserves to be near her. Some will say she's changed, and they will be right. She has changed in all the ways that matter. She no longer lives for applause. She lives for alignment. She no longer fears walking alone. She fears abandoning herself. And in that sacred commitment to her own wholeness, she becomes magnetic, not because she is trying to be, but because people can feel the difference. They feel that her joy is earned, not borrowed. They feel that her silence is not empty, but sacred. They feel that her boundaries are not barriers, but altars. The woman who glows like this has nothing to prove. She does not shrink to fit into places she has outgrown. She does not water herself down to be palatable. Her light tells the story of everything she has walked through and everything she chose not to let define her. She has felt the sting of rejection and no longer confuses it with a lack of worth. She has felt the ache of longing and no longer mistakes it for love. She has been emptied and has chosen to rebuild from the inside out. And in doing so, she has become the kind of woman whose radiance cannot be replicated because it is not decoration, it is evidence. Evidence of the fire she walked through and the truth she refused to release. Evidence of the nights she held herself through the shaking. Evidence of the prayers whispered into the dark when no one else could hear. Her glow is not fragile because it is not for anyone else to validate. It is her own. And now, even in rooms where she is misunderstood, even in moments where she is alone, that glow remains, because she has stopped seeking the light and realized she is the source. She has stopped waiting to be chosen and remembered she was always the home, and the woman who knows that cannot be broken again in the same way. She does not rise to return to who she was. She rises as who she has become, whole, luminous, unshakable, herself. She no longer walks into rooms asking herself if she belongs there. She enters knowing she brings something sacred just by being whole. The woman who once sat in silence questioning her worth has become the woman whose presence shifts the atmosphere, and not because she's louder. Not because she demands attention, but because there is something in her that cannot be ignored, a calmness that comes from facing everything she once feared and surviving without bitterness. The heartbreak that nearly undid her was not the end. It was the beginning of the woman she was always meant to become. And now she carries that truth like a pulse. Her smile is quieter, but it reaches deeper. Her eyes hold stories she does not have to tell. Her stillness is not absent sight, is depth, and people feel it, even if they cannot explain it. They feel the integrity in the way she speaks, the way she pauses before she gives, the way she listens without losing herself. They feel the unshakable way she stands in who she is, no longer bending to be understood. She has nothing to prove, because she has already proven it to herself in the dark. The nights she chose not to call, the mornings she chose to get up, the quiet moments when she chose healing over revenge, all of it lives in her bones now. All of it hums through her every step. She has become the woman who does not need to be rescued or validated, only met, and the ones who are not ready for that will fall away without a sound, because her energy does not cling, it clarifies. She is not here to beg, she is here to bless, and that blessing is not for everyone. It is for the ones who see her as she is now, not as a woman who was broken, but as a woman who broke open and found something eternal within. She wears her past not as shame, but as initiation. Her softness is laced with discernment, her openness is guarded by wisdom, her joy is not naive, it is chosen, and it radiates from her in everything she does, from the way she loves to the way she lets go. She is no longer defined by who hurt her. She is defined by who she decided to become in the aftermath. She walks differently now, with gravity and grace, because her self-respect is non-negotiable. Her peace is earned, and her light is not for sale. She builds her life slowly, intentionally, not to impress but to feel aligned, and everything in her world reflects that. Her relationships are rooted, her boundaries are sacred, her silence is deliberate. There is no desperation in her, only devotion to truth, to healing, to becoming. She has stopped waiting for someone to choose her. She has chosen herself in the deepest way possible, and that choice continues to bloom in every corner of her life. This is not the kind of woman who needs to be introduced. This is the kind of woman who is felt, the kind who leaves people wondering what it is about her that feels different, more grounded, more alive. The kind who reminds others of something they forgot they were allowed to be. She is not the same, she is more. And the world feels it in every room she enters, every boundary she sets, every silence she keeps. She is the woman who chose to rise, not from rage, not from revenge, but from reverence for herself, for her story, and for the kind of life that can only be built by a woman who has walked through fire and come home to her own light.